Do you think you know evil? Do you really believe you've seen the darkest side of Middle-earth? Because what you know about Morgoth is only the tip of a spear corroded by darkness. Before Sauron, before the One Ring, there was something much older and infinitely more twisted. Few speak of it, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of ignorance. But today, you're going to confront what was buried in the very foundations of the world. While most are dazzled by epic battles and radiant heroes, the true origin of chaos lies in the forgotten depths of Arda. Utumno and Angband were not just fortresses, they were power plants of destruction, born from the mind of the fallen Vala who dared to defy the gods themselves. And the most disturbing part? The marks he left are still alive, in monsters, in legends, and even in you. In this video, I'm going to take you along dark paths that few have the courage to explore. We're going to reveal Tolkien's darkest secrets, buried, distorted, silenced truths. Get ready to understand how evil is born, how it hides, and why, even after Morgoth's fall, it was never truly gone. It's not just history, it's a grim reflection of what exists in the real world and inside us. But beware, this knowledge isn't for everyone. It's for those who truly seek to understand how the greatest empires of evil are built and why ignorance is always the first brick. And if you think Sauron was the biggest villain, you're going to be surprised by who really wrote the rules of the game long before him. Have you ever stopped to think about what evil would be in its raw form before it even took shape in the tales of Middle-earth? That's exactly what Utumno represents. Morgoth, still known as Melkor back then, didn't just want to cause chaos. He wanted to shape the world to his grim tastes. That's why he dug deep into the bowels of northern Arda and built Utumno, not as a home, but as an abyss of corruption. Imagine a spiritual factory of darkness, where every breath of air carries decay. What was born there wasn't just a physical place, but an idea. And ideas, my friend, when twisted, are extremely dangerous. Utumno spread more than just shadows. It was as if nature itself was falling ill. Trees rotted, animals went mad, and even time seemed to lose its way. If in your personal life you've ever felt that everything around you is heavy, confusing, colorless, it's almost as if Utumno were blowing dust all over you. In those moments, it's good to remember that while the environment influences you, you are still the master of your own will. And why was Utumno so feared? Because it was silent. It didn't come with alarms or explosions. Corruption seeped in subtly, like a well-spun lie, like a bad habit that settles in before you even notice. Look around you. How many little Utumnos are you tolerating without realizing it? Toxic people, draining environments, limiting ideas, these might all be your own little dark fortresses, and it takes courage to face them. And courage was what so many lacked back then. The Valar even waged the first war against Melkor, but only later did they grasp the gravity of what he had built. Meanwhile, Utumno continued to linger, expanding its roots like a cancer beneath Middle-earth. If it were today, it would be like letting an addiction grow in your home. At first it seems harmless, then it turns into a monster with an insatiable appetite, and thus evil perpetuates itself. But it's interesting to note that even amidst all this terror, Morgoth was strategic. While everyone feared Utumno, few noticed that a new bastion was quietly being raised in the west, a certain place of iron and smoke called Angband. Coincidence? With Morgoth, nothing is ever by chance. While the eyes of the world were fixed on Utumno, Morgoth was already plotting something even crueler. At first glance, Angband seemed just like a backup fortress, a plan B. But the truth is that it was the embryo of a far more brutal inferno. Imagine a place where even silence is loud, where the very air scratches your lungs and the ground pulses with hatred. That was Angband. And you know who was on duty there from the very beginning? Sauron. Yes, the future Lord of the Rings started out as a nightmare manager in that iron dungeon. Morgoth knew that in times of crisis, survival isn't determined by who fights the hardest, but by who plans the best. When the Valar destroyed Utumno, Angband became the new throne of chaos, and it was there that he laid the foundations of his dark reign. It's no wonder he proclaimed himself king of the world. The arrogance was as thick as the molten metal in Angband's forges. A good real-life analogy? People who lose everything but still insist on playing the game by pulling strings behind the scenes. Dark cunning. The Thangorodrim towers rising above Angband weren't just mountains. They were warnings. 3 stone teeth spitting smoke over Middle-earth, screaming that evil had a fixed address and a panoramic view. If you've ever been to a place where just arriving makes you feel the heavy air, the confused mind, and the restless soul, then you know the energy of Angband. It's like stepping into an environment where you feel you need to guard yourself, even if you're not sure against. And the sense of imprisonment wasn't just physical. Many who entered Angband lost more than their freedom. They lost their will. Minds were broken, spirits corrupted. How many places or relationships work like this nowadays? Where control is subtle, yet relentless. Where you feel trapped, even without handcuffs. Angband's iron prison is more relevant than it seems. And often, the key is in your hands. It just takes realizing it. And if you think that the environment was the scariest part, wait until you see what began to be born in the depths of these fortresses. Because not every creation is sacred, and not every creature comes into being with good intentions. Within the bowels of Utumno and Angband, Morgoth wasn't just scheming wars. He was birthing horrors. And I'm not talking about fairy tale monsters, but true aberrations molded from pain, corruption, and despair. Orcs, balrogs, dragons, and werewolves didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were forged, twisting what was once pure. Captured, elves tortured until they lost their essence, and voila, the first orcs were born, cruel for sure, but also ingenious, from a dark point of view. And the balrogs. These weren't just simple fiery creatures. They were spirits of flame, Maiar, just like Gandalf, but seduced by darkness. Imagine taking a being of pure light and transforming it into an entity of terror. It's like watching a genius turn villainous, and the most frightening part is that, at its core, it's still a genius. That shows how even the most enlightened can lose their way if pride and fear take over. Look at the people around you. How many sparks have been extinguished by trauma or wrong choices? These places, Utumno and Angband, turned into true laboratories of perversion. And here's a parallel. Think of today's social media. Platforms that could nurture knowledge and connection often become breeding grounds for hate, toxic comparison, and alienation. It's not much different. When purpose is lost, even the noblest tools become weapons of destruction, whether digital or supernatural. The most twisted part is that Morgoth didn't just create monsters. He created mentalities. He created beings that were born to hate, obey, and destroy. If that doesn't remind you of certain belief systems or ideologies that arise in our world to segregate, belittle, or manipulate, then take another look. True corruption begins when you believe that destruction is justifiable. And sadly, that's more common than it seems, whether in wars or in a simple family group chat. But even with all the chaos generated, Morgoth knew that open warfare was inevitable, and that sooner or later the powerful of the world would come knocking on his door. What he might not have counted on was the strength of those who choose to resist, even in the face of absolute darkness. It's impossible to talk about Morgoth without mentioning the epic battles that marked his downfall, or at least an attempt at it. When the Valar finally decided to truly intervene, Utumno was destroyed in an offensive that shook Middle-earth to its core. And yes, Morgoth was captured. But like any strategic villain, he wasn't held for long. You know that person who always seems to find a way to bounce back even after a crushing fall. That was Morgoth, only on an apocalyptic scale. When he returned, he didn't come back just to wreak havoc. He returned with a thirst for absolute dominion. He rebuilt Angband and embedded into his crown the 3 stolen Silmarils, which burned his flesh ceaselessly. Do you think he cared? Not one bit. Morgoth was so obsessed with power that he preferred eternal pain to relinquishing what symbolized his triumph. You can draw a parallel here with people who cling to positions, relationships, or ideas that hurt just so it doesn't seem like they lost. Attachment, when it becomes a prison, is just another name for pride. And while all this was happening, the world was preparing for war. The hosts of the elves, led by kings with an almost suicidal courage, defied the legions of Angband. The battles were not only physical, but spiritual. It was the fight between hope and fear, between free will and total domination. Fingolfin, for example, rode alone to the gates of Angband and challenged Morgoth to a duel, alone, against a corrupted Valar. That isn't just heroism, it's a clear message. When you believe in something greater, the impossible bows down. Of course, the fall of these fortresses wasn't simple. They resisted, and a lot. But each war left scars, in bodies, in hearts, in the very land itself. The ground trembled, the sky bled, and evil, even when defeated, always left a taste of rust in the mouth. Just like in life. Sometimes you win a battle, but you feel that you lost something along the way. It's not just about winning, it's about what you become in the fight. And the most curious part, even with all that terror spread, there were still people willing to step into Angband, to tread into the lair of darkness out of love, honor, or pure faith. Because no matter how strong evil gets, good, when it's driven by purpose, knows no bounds. Angband was not just a gloomy castle, it was a soul-grinding machine. Thousands of elves and men were imprisoned in its mines, shackled not only by chains of iron, but by the loss of hope. Imagine living for years in suffocating tunnels, with screams echoing off the walls and the certainty that tomorrow would bring nothing but more pain. It was in such an environment that figures like Medros, Gwyndor, and Húrin were kept. And, even so, they did not break. That says it all. Sometimes resisting is the highest form of victory. Medros, for example, was hung by one hand on a mountain for years, and yet he survived. Can you imagine the mental strength that requires? Húrin, on the other hand, challenged Morgoth face to face and never gave in to his will. This reminds us that even amidst despair, dignity is still a choice, and it's a powerful choice. How many times in difficult moments do we have the option to stand tall or give in to chaos? These characters show us that even when everything seems lost, honor doesn't have to go down with you. But this story isn't made up solely of suffering. There was daring too. Beren, for instance, invaded Angband to retrieve a Silmaril, something unthinkable. And he wasn't alone. Luthien, one of the brightest figures in all of Middle-earth, accompanied him. An elf born of royalty, facing the greatest evil in the world alongside a mortal. That isn't just an epic romance, it's a symbol. It's the message that love, when led by courage, can tear down even the darkest walls. Fingolfin, before them, had already challenged Morgoth, himself in single combat. A gesture that no one expected, yet that ignited the morale of the free peoples. He knew he was going to die, but he did it anyway. Because sometimes you don't fight to win. You fight to show that you're not afraid. And sometimes that changes everything. Whether in a tough conversation, a professional decision, or a necessary breakup, taking a stand can have far-reaching echoes. And as terrifying as Angband was, it was never completely invincible. Every act of heroism was a crack in its iron walls. And little by little, the cracks began to multiply, because even the most entrenched evil starts to crumble when the light insists on coming in. And that's exactly what began to happen when the celestial armies decided to return. We reached the end of the line for Morgoth, but like every grand tyrant, he did not fall without leaving a mark. The War of Wrath was more than a final confrontation. It was a cosmic earthquake. The Valar, who had kept their distance for ages, returned with everything they had. And they didn't come alone. Their celestial hosts, with giant eagles, immortal. Warriors and light pouring in from all sides advanced on Angband like an avalanche of justice. It was so intense that the very geography of Beleriand collapsed. Literally, entire cities sank into the sea. The image of Morgoth's defeat is not just symbolic, it's almost poetic. His pride, which once weighed more than the iron crown in which he set the Silmarils, was crushed. His crown, by the way, was melted down into a collar, and he, the king of the world, was cast into the eternal void, without a throne, without legions, without glory. This teaches one thing: unchecked arrogance always ends in ruin. It might seem invincible for a while, but sooner or later the fall comes. And the bigger the ego, the harder the tumble. You've seen that happen, right? The collapse of Angband was so intense that it redrew the map of Middle-earth. Beleriand, once home to elves, men, and heroic tales, simply disappeared beneath the waters. It's as if the earth had undergone a deep cleansing. Some say that certain scars need floods, not just metaphorical ones. When something is too rotten, sometimes it can't be fixed. You only have the option to tear it down and start anew, and that applies to kingdoms and to phases of life as well. The most curious part is that, even with Morgoth defeated, the world did not return to a paradise. There was still darkness, mistrust, open wounds, because some pains don't vanish just because the villain was imprisoned. Sometimes the trauma remains, the impact lingers, and the heroes have to deal with the after. How many times have you won a personal battle only to realize that the hardest part came afterward? The silence, the rebuilding, what to do with the rubble, and even with everything crumbling, even with the war over, something remained, something burning like an ember under the ashes of defeat. Because Morgoth's malice wasn't taken with him. He left seeds scattered, and one of them was already germinating in the shadows of a new name, Sauron. Even defeated, even cast into the void, Morgoth did not vanish entirely. His body, yes, but his venom, that continued seeping through Middle-earth's veins. Sauron, his most loyal lieutenant, not only survived, he thrived. And with him, the essence of the darkness from Angband and Utumno took on a new form. You know that feeling that certain cycles of evil never fully end? That's it. Morgoth planted seeds that kept sprouting centuries later in subtler shadows, but equally lethal. Orcs, werewolves, dragons, they all continue as living echoes of that initial corruption. They are like dormant viruses, ready to reappear at the slightest sign of weakness. This is reflected even today: unresolved traumas, inherited habits, beliefs that we carry without even realizing. All of that might be the mark of Morgoth in our lives. And if you've ever caught yourself repeating a destructive pattern, even when you want to change, maybe you're dealing with your own inner Angband. Recognizing that is the first step to breaking free. Some wise ones believe that the remnants of Utumno still exist in the frozen lands of Forochel. An unnatural cold, strange even by northern standards, reserved peoples, inexplicable phenomena. All of that fuels the legend that the ancient evil still breathes there. And here's something interesting. The farther from the center, the more forgotten the threat becomes. This applies to life too. Sometimes what affects us the most is hidden in the corners of the mind, in memories we sweep under the rug. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. Morgoth's legacy isn't just a matter of mythology, it's a warning. True evil rarely appears with trumpets and thunder. It whispers. It disguises itself as efficiency, as order, as quick fixes. It convinces before it dominates, and before you know it, you're caught in its logic. That's why it's important to develop discernment. Read, study, question. A good start? Besides Tolkien, dive into works like George Orwell's 1984 or Lord of the Flies, which also reveal the roots of evil disguised as civility. And the lingering question is, if evil can survive the fall of its creator, can good too? Only that, for that to happen, it must be nurtured. It must be remembered, it must be passed on in stories, in actions, in the small choices we make every day, because every light must fight to keep burning, especially when the shadows of the past still hover at the edges of the present. Now that you've uncovered the darkest secrets of Middle-earth, here's a question for you. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Because understanding Utumno, Angband, and Morgoth's corrupted mind goes far beyond a lesson in fantastical history. It's an invitation to reflect. How many Morgoths have you already faced in your life? How many times have you let fear shape your decisions? How many times did you ignore small signs that later turned into insurmountable fortresses? The truth is, evil rarely shows up with horns and screams. It infiltrates daily choices, in complicit silences, in zones of comfort. And if Morgoth taught us anything, it's that ignoring the root of the problem only allows it to grow in the shadows. So, what do you need to confront today? Which fortress must you tear down before it becomes your own Angband? Are you ready to embark on that journey? To look inward with the same courage Fingolfin showed in the face of embodied terror? Because every act of heroism begins with one simple decision: not to be silent in the face of darkness. Now tell me in the comments, which part of this story impacted you the most? Had you known these forgotten details about Morgoth? And most importantly, do you think he was worse than Sauron? If this helped you see Tolkien's universe with new eyes, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who also needs to dive deep into the secrets of Middle-earth. The next journey is already being forged, and you won't want to miss out.